Hey kids, Tony Rowe here, back with my second round game from the Lichess 45 plus 45 league against Aliquantus. I was black this round, and my opponent opened with 1e4, and already I had a choice. I noticed that in my preparation that he played against the Rubinstein, or against the French, he played the Tarish variation, and then going into the Rubinstein, he pretty habitually played into this line, which I think is equal after something like b6, but I think my team needed a win, or I wanted to win to make sure that my team didn't run into any problems, and so I decided to mix it up a little bit, and I played Aлекhine's defense. And I also noticed that during my preparation, my opponent scored something like 35, 37, 38% against Aлекhine's defense, and that he didn't play any of like these offbeat, like annoying variations. He played stuff that I had studied, like the exchange variation or after d6, knight f3. So I was pretty prepared in these lines already, and so I didn't have to do a lot of work, and I know that these are lines that, especially the exchange variation, which is what was played in the game, I know that I score pretty well in these lines, and I have a good feel for this, so I decided to go into this. So yeah, like I said, my opponent went 2e5, and I went knight d5, d4, d6, so all standard Alechine's defense stuff, striking out against this pawn on e5, and my opponent went into the exchange variation. And in my opinion, c takes d6 is really the only move worth playing. That might sound a little harsh. Perhaps it is. It might be a little bit hyperbolic, but e takes d6 to me is not why someone plays the Alechine's defense. It's a totally acceptable and playable move, but I don't play the Alechine's defense to accept a 100% symmetrical pawn structure where I just have a little bit less space. And I think Black's development is a little bit passive, and it's extremely solid, of course. Black has a very compact pawn structure. Usually his pieces will all find pretty natural squares, etc. But I would want a higher level of imbalance, and so after e takes d6, I only ever play c takes d6, despite e takes d6 being recommended in basically all of the literature that's out there. So, and my opponent went, knight c3, and then I go g6. So this is the main thing about c takes d6, is not only does black have an extra pawn in the center compared to white, but also I get to put my bishop on this extremely active diagonal here, instead of after e takes d6 having to basically go bishop e7 and castles with you know, a d pawn for a d pawn instead of having an extra center pawn here. So okay, so after 6g6, knight c3 g6, white actually already has a pretty important decision. The best move by far is the move my opponent played, which is 7 bishop e3. But the reason why it's the best move is like really nuanced, in fact. So a lot of you guys, if I gave this position to you over the board and you didn't know that much about Alechine's defense, you'd essentially play knight f3 almost immediately. And that move is okay, but after bishop g7, let's say bishop e3, there are various move orders here, and they all lead to basically the same, I would say, 2 or 3 positions. But let's go just bishop e3 here. Castles, white faces a slight issue, and it might not be, I mean, it's not an issue, but it's sort of, these lines will illustrate why going bishop e3 immediately instead of knight f3 and then bishop e3 is important. So the most sort of natural and classical setup would be to go bishop e2, and then black can continue bishop g4, castles, knight c6. And now the threat of bishop takes f3, knight takes c4 compels white to basically go b3 and protect the c4 pawn. And now black has a very important move. And take a second and see if you can figure out what it is. Okay, that move is d5. equalizing the space in the center, adding a little bit of extra central tension. And you might be wondering at first, why would I ever want to go d5 when after c5 I have to go essentially knight to c8. Knight d7 allows knight takes d5, so black has to go knight c8. Well, if you look at this position a little bit longer, you might realize that black has a very straightforward plan here. That plan being bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and then e6, and knight 8 to e7 to f5. And lopping off this knight makes d4 weak, and giving up the light squared bishop and then putting all of your pawns on light squares leaves black with a pretty harmonious position. This bishop is good. This knight comes to the f5 square where it attacks d4. This knight's already attacking d4. And all of a sudden it looks like black has a very acceptable and active position. One well-known game, well-known probably to Alekhine players, or at least just well-known to me, is Michael Eigner versus Hikaru Nakamura. Played in Las Vegas in 2007 that went h3. By the way, I think this move is inaccurate since black basically always wants to play this anyway. But bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, threatening, of course, to take on d5 somehow. So e6, rook c1, knight 8 to e7, knight e2, knight f5. And then I think Eigner went bishop g4 and Nakamura went knight h4, threatening either f5 or h5 and bishop f3 and then knight takes f3. Eigner went f4 and then Nakamura went h5 anyway. And I think black is slightly better here. Again, after bishop f3, the knight coming back to f5, for instance, black can play b6 at some point, start chipping away at the center, perhaps queen f6, etc. So, in general, white should try and get b4, b5 going, and he didn't really do that in this game. And black is always going to try and pressure d4 or try and get in the e5 break. So, this setup with bishop e2 allows pretty much just straightforward development, and then this plan with d5, c5, knight c8, and e6, knight e7. And we'll see this again later. So in this critical tabia, sometimes people go h3, intending to stop bishop g4 as in the previous game. And black can just go knight c6, the most reasonable developing move. And now if bishop e2, black can go bishop f5, really the only reasonable square for the bishop at this point. Castles, and d5 again. And the difference between this and the previous line is that white hasn't played b3 yet, and so on c5, black can hop in with knight c4. And a game, Lev Milman versus Alexander Shabalov from Philadelphia 2004, went bishop takes c4, d takes c4, queen a4, and now black gets in bishop d3 and should be very comfortable. Their game continued rook fd1, and then the very interesting move queen to e8. The idea being e5, d4, knight d4, d5, knight d4, or just going rook d8. Now that the queen is off the d8 square, black can go rook d8 and start to work up pressure against this d4 pawn. So, and if this knight moves, there might be some sketchy tactics involving like knight takes d4 with this discovery on the queen. When queen takes e8, will be met by knight f3 check or whatever. So. After h3, knight c6, white suffers from the fact that he hasn't played b3 yet, and d5, c5, knight c4 is possible. So, again, going to like the next level of prophylaxis, if white goes b3 here instead, black can still go d5, and after c5, now can go knight d7. Point being that knight takes d5 is met by knight takes c5 when there's this nasty pin on the long diagonal. And if instead after knight d7 not knight takes d5, just going rook c1 to protect the knight and threaten knight takes d5, there's knight takes c5 anyway. Again, because after d takes c5, there's d4 with a nice little fork. And the game is opening up with white's king still in the center, and very strong dark squared bishop for black. Absolutely no problems. So it's also worth considering after b3 just going f5 and looking to go either e5 immediately or f4, bishop c1, let's say, e5, something like that. This is probably maybe even slightly better for black. So, okay, back to the main line. Sorry for that long digression. I also talked about all of these lines in my discussion of Jeffrey Zhang versus Gadakomsky from the U.S. Championships this year. That's in my awesome annotations playlist if you want to take a look at that. I might have gone into slightly more detail, but it's basically the same explanation. So it's important that white goes 7 bishop e3 here, and after seeing all that and then seeing how the game plays out, you'll see why in a second. So the first thing to notice, of course, is that after bishop g7, white has not gone knight f3 yet, and so that does not allow bishop g4. And secondly, after white's next move, rook c1, let me annotate this with an exclam because it's an important part of the plan. Castles b3, we notice another thing. The long diagonal and the c4 square are completely consolidated. So now d5, knight c5, knight d7 doesn't work because on knight takes d5, there's no knight takes c5, and there's no hanging knight on c3 anymore. And so all of the counterplay along the long diagonal has been neutralized, and also black has not been allowed to play bishop g4 because knight f3 has not been played yet, of course. The last thing is that because knight f3 has not been played, the most obvious move, knight c6, sort of fails to just the simple d5. Another benefit to playing rook c1 is that now, of course, bishop takes c3 check doesn't lose a full rook. And after knight takes knight e5, bishop e2, probably exclam, this knight doesn't have any squares. Oops, how do I make that red? There we go. And f4 is a threat. I'll get there. Another benefit to white having not gone knight f3 immediately. And historically, this line, this rook c1, b3, bishop e3 stuff, has been kind of the argument against playing c takes d6 in the Exchange Aлекhine's defense. Essentially, for a long time, people thought black basically had no good move here. And this so-called Voronezh variation, named for, I think it's maybe in Ukraine, Voronezh. It's like a region in Ukraine or something where a lot of players, or maybe one correspondence player popularized this. Someone fact-check me on all that. I might have made up all that, but this line sort of put this c takes d6 line sort of out of business for a long time. No one could find a good move. And then this move 9 bishop f5 started popping up. And the idea is simple but subtle. Black basically has no other move. So almost by process of elimination, you can come up with this move. But it's really a developing move that's also a waiting move. So white's most natural move, which is what's played in the game, is knight f3. And now black makes the argument, essentially, that after d5, c5, knight c8, and let's say bishop e2, that knight c6 castles bishop g4 is still fine for black, even though he's lost a full move. So this is a move down in the exact same position as Aigner Nakamura, because I played bishop f5 to bishop f5 to g4, wasting a move. But black is making the argument that those positions are so comfortable for him that it simply doesn't matter. And that's very similar to what happened in the game. So after bishop f5, knight f3, I went d5, c5, knight c8, and then my opponent played the interesting move b4. There are a couple other moves worth looking at, I guess, quickly on 9 bishop f5. One idea for white is to be a little bit stubborn and in allowing bishop g4 right away and going bishop e2. In my notes, I have d5, c5, knight c8 as still being best. And white doesn't have a ton of deviations here besides knight f3. I mean, he sort of has to get on with simple development of his kingside. But I did think that he could try bishop f3, intending to go knight e2 instead, but that e5 gave black pretty good counterplay. Or white can try the even more weird g4, just grabbing all of the space. And after bishop d7, h3, probably e6, the position is really very unclear. White has more space and has kicked black's pieces back pretty significantly, but he's also played h3 and g4, which could be extremely weakening later. Note that knight takes d5 is not possible here because of bishop c6, winning everything. So let me mark that real quick, doing these annotations on the fly. And check out my annotations of the Jean Komsky game for more info on the move d5, which is also interesting. Grabbing space, stopping knight c6, perhaps going bishop d4 in the future. I think that e6 is perfectly reasonable and playable for black. It does offer a piece after g4. The bishop has no squares anymore. Black has to go bishop takes c3, rook takes c3, bishop e4, and then f3 legitimately traps the bishop. But bishop d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, rook d3, and something like knight e3, rook e3, queen h4 check is basically all forced, and white has to dislodge his king, and black gets a lead in development. These two central pawns, the open c file for the piece. I think black is totally fine here. But check out my other video for more info on really all of this stuff. Okay, so sorry for the digression again. We'll get into the game, I promise. Okay, so my opponent goes knight f3, d5, knight c8, d5, c5, knight c8, and then he plays an interesting move, b4, immediately. Not the most popular move in my database, but not a bad move, and it's been played by some strong players. I think it's very logical. So kudos to my opponent. More natural, like I said before, would be bishop e2, knight c6, castles, bishop g4, and now b4. White's idea, of course, that knight takes b4 is met by rook b1 and rook takes b7, which would certainly not be in black's best interest to open up the queen side like that. Instead, black should probably just go a6, rook b1, e6, and this sort of standard plan of ganging up on d4. And black should be okay here. There are a couple very strong players as black who have entered this position and done okay. Nakamura's won a game from here. Yermolinsky's drawn from here against Maurice Ashley in 2003, etc. Stockfish thinks this is about equal. I don't disagree. Some of you guys might be wondering what happens if h3 here. Stopping bishop g4 takes f3 before it's possible. Black has another way to offload the light squared bishop actually after knight c6. Bishop e2, and now bishop e4, exclam. It's really important for black to get rid of this bishop on f5 because it's actually not really doing much of anything, and it's important for black to find an active way to play, and the only really active plan is to start ganging up on this d4 pawn, and so black really needs to find a way to exchange off this light squared bishop. And oftentimes in these structures where black goes with a kingside fianchetto and a pawn on d5, it's just simply hard to find a square for this light squared bishop anyway. And a lot of times the best thing black can do is to get rid of it. On f5, something like, it can't stay on f5 forever because if I go e6, you like risk getting it trapped somehow. And again, it just doesn't really do anything on a square like d7 or e6. So black is almost compelled to go bishop e4. And of course, I'm going to take this if allowed and get basically the same positions as always. Like this would simply transpose to something like the game. And so white should probably play the critical move and take it. And after knight g5, black gets to win the d4 pawn for his d5 pawn, essentially, and should be okay. There is an interesting maneuver here that I found during my analysis that's really helpful. And you know what? Let's see if you guys can find it. So it's black to move here, and really the only real problem that black has in this position, this knight is really well placed, this bishop is strong, black has a really nice compact structure, but this knight on c8 is pretty weak. It's not well placed at all, of course, and something like b6 would allow c6. E6 is possible to go knight to e7, but e6 now with this knight on e4, as opposed to in all of these other positions, pretty horrifically weakens the d6 square. So see if you can find a move here for black. Okay. I think probably either nudge of the a pawn is the best move, and I think kind of a cool illustration of creative thinking in chess. So the move I have in my notes is a6. a6 is a useful move in these structures anyway, just because white typically wants to gain some space on the queen side, and being able to exchange a pair of pawns and open up this a file is good. But the really important thing is it allows me to go knight c8 to a7 to c6, or to b5 in rare circumstances, and fix this knight. So something like castles, knight a7, and then I'm coming into c6 without having to weaken the d6 square and allow something like knight d6. So kind of a cool little maneuver there, I think well worth keeping in mind if you play these positions. But okay, d5, c5, knight c8, b4. And here was the first think that I went into during this game. I had bashed out all of these other moves, and in fact I was, what was I making? I needed garlic powder during this game, and at some point during the game, I was making my dinner and playing this game at the same time, and I didn't have any garlic powder, and I really needed it. And so I just went to the grocery store in the middle of the game. I live about 3 minutes, like a 3-minute drive away from the grocery store. It's essentially right across the street, and like the majority of the time is getting out of my garage and then finding a parking spot. But I went to the grocery store, bought garlic powder, and came back. I don't remember if it was on this move or it was later, but yeah. So you know, I welcome all of the ridiculing for time trouble if it ever happens, because I'm stupid enough to go to the grocery store during a chess game. So. Okay, so I thought for a long time here between basically two moves, bishop g4 or a6, and I think I chose the wrong one. I went bishop g4, my logic being that I would just I thought, okay, why allow even him to think about h3 when my knight is not on c6 yet, and I don't have the counterplay with bishop e4, knight takes e4, d takes e4, and knight takes d4 yet. So why allow him to do this when like let's say bishop g4 or a6, h3. No, I'm just insane. Yeah, it doesn't even make sense. I'm not even going to say it. It's just the dumbest thing ever. I just thought it was slightly more flexible or more precise to go bishop g4 first, but I think it's actually more precise to go a6 first now. Reason being is that after bishop g4, which is the game move, I think white can try b5, which is not the end of the world. Maybe white is very slightly better here. I can just go e6, but the thing I don't like about this position is that I don't feel like this knight belongs on the d7 square. I think it's a little passive there, and it's just not the right circuit. Like in this line, it's really important, I think, or it's just far more harmonious, I'd say, to put the knight on c6, because black really needs the counterplay against d4. And if white plays b5 later, the a5 square is not at all bad for black's knight, because c4 is always invadable, if that's a word now. So I think I should probably go a6 and ensure that white does not get to play b5 and prohibit me from going knight c6. And I think I was a little bit worried about h3, but I think I can use exactly the same strategy as in the notes. Just simply do this, and we transpose the stuff I've already talked about, in essence, or pretty close. So I think that was a small inaccuracy on my part. Not a huge deal at all. I'm not sure white is even much better after b5, e6, and knight e7, knight d7, but it might have been a more practical try than what white played in the game, which is just to essentially allow the standard positions that we all know and love at this point. Okay, and here my opponent played a4, which is a very thematic idea. Just, again, looking to go b5 at some point, and I went knight c6. So I've achieved the setup that I want to achieve. At some point, I'm going to go bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, put my knight on e7, and then hop into f5, and I'm going to start my counterplay against d4. Always being on the lookout for e5 breaks when perhaps d takes e5 allows this nasty fork. It doesn't work right now, of course, but at some point that's something, if you play these positions, you have to be cognizant of. and my opponent went b5. And I didn't think very long here, but perhaps I should have. So there's always this decision when your opponent plays b5 in this line, whether or not you should take on b5 or just leave it. And I took, thinking, hey, open a file. This looks pretty natural, and there's no real issue with the pin after rook a1 because I can just go knight e7, and it's not a big deal. Then my rook is protected. This knight's not really pinned anymore. In fact, that's exactly what happened in the game. This is how the game went. But I think I should have gone knight a5 here, exclam. And the reason will become clear later in the game. The short answer is that it's not obvious at all, actually, and it's the reason why I did not play this move. The reason is that if you go knight a5, you don't give the white knight the a4 square. And when you play a takes b5, it clears up the a4 square for white to go knight a4 to b6, which, if I want to go knight e7, leaves the b6 square critically weak, and then there's this issue with him hitting my rook, and this knight is really irritating. It stops my queen from going to d7, etc. So I think it's correct to go 16 knight a5. And in fact, in one of the Nakamura games I mentioned from earlier, in a similar position, he went knight a5 without taking, and his opponent played b takes a6. And I never understood why he went knight a5 until I played this game. And I knew that Nakamura played a game where he went knight e5 without taking, and I never knew why, and now I know why, and now I'm going to be very hesitant to ever take on b5 again, even when it's correct. So, okay, so after knight c6, b5, a takes b5, I went knight a5. And my opponent played rook a1, which is a perfectly natural move. I don't think it's a bad move per se. I think this position is still around equal after knight e7, but I think my opponent had a better move, which someone, I think it might have been Aliquantus, mentioned after the game. And the better move, well, take a second and see if you can find it. I think it's better to make you quiz yourself. Okay, the better move is 18 bishop g5. And the point is that after knight e7, white can go knight a4, and the impending threat of knight b6 forcing the really ugly rook a7 is simply very annoying for black. In addition, this bishop pin prevents me from going knight f5 and just sort of clogs up my development a little bit, and makes it hard for me to get some actual active counterplay. And so I think this move probably would have cast some doubt on me playing a takes b5 a couple moves back, because knight a4 is annoying in this position. You can contrast this position to the game position where knight a4 does not end up being very good. It's also worth noting that something like queen d7 isn't very good because of knight e5. Takes is forced, but then white can take on g4 instead, and after bishop g7, bishop e2, I think white is better. This knight and this queen are kind of janky here, and white has the two bishops. This would be a much better version of similar positions that to what white got in the game. But okay, after b5, a takes b5, knight a5, my opponent went rook a1, very natural move, setting up a pin, grabbing the open a file, etc. And I went knight e7, and he went knight a4, which for a second to me looked very strong. I started panicking a little bit because indeed knight b6 would force rook a7 to keep this knight protected, and then my knight would be pinned to this rook on a7, and white would be free to gang up on it with like rook a4, queen a1, etc. And I started panicking like, oh, holy crap, I'm in a lot of trouble here. But it's kind of unfortunate for white that knight a4 essentially forces one of two good moves. I don't have very many options to meet the threat of knight b6. So this actually was my longest think of the game, and after this, I think it was really my only serious think of the game. So take a second and see what you would play here. I think there are two good moves here, so see if you can find one of them. Okay, so I thought for a long time, and I decided to go knight c4. The other idea that I think is good is bishop takes f3, and then knight c4. So, of course, both of these moves, by sinking the knight in c4, meet knight b6 just because I can take on b6, and there's no, nonsense along the a file anymore. The only question is whether or not... so bishop takes f3, knight c4 does not allow white to take on c4, but it also gives up the light squared bishop for the knight instead of maybe white giving up his light squared bishop for your knight. I looked at this for a while, and I was unsure. Of course, I would probably take this if allowed, so I think white should probably go bishop g5, and I looked at h6, bishop takes c7, queen e7, bishop e2, maybe threatening to take here and then gang up on this c-pawn somehow, and I wasn't sure if black was much better here. Turns out that black is much better here. Stockfish thinks it's maybe almost a pawn better because it's really hard for white to defend d4 with this knight on a4 and with no dark squared bishop, like, queen f4 or queen h4 or queen f6 would attack d4. But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure about this position. It was hard for me to visualize whether or not black was much better at all here. And after knight c4, immediately, I was having a hard time finding good ways for white to play. I thought that white really only had two playable moves here, either bishop g5 or bishop takes c4. And after bishop takes c4, I looked at a lot of stuff. So, of course, I have to go d takes c4. And now knight b6 is absolutely awful, in fact. Just rook a1, queen a1, and then I get to completely shatter white's kingside, and probably this is already just completely decisive. d4 is, I think, lost by force, but I can also just go things like queen h4, queen h3, knight h4, and just try and checkmate white. So this would be completely lost. I also looked at rook c1, but I thought that, again, this exposes another issue with the position, is that if white moves this rook away from a1, his queen is not free to take on f3 because a4 is hanging. So he would have to play g takes f3 again, and then after knight f5, I think I'm probably just much better. Again, knight h4, queen h4, h3, or just taking on d4 should be much better for black. I thought that white probably had to go h3 and go into this position, and after rook c1, of course this rook, so a4 doesn't hang, I assumed that c3 was good. Again, this is me trying to visualize this position, 4 moves ahead or whatever. Of course, knight takes c3 is not possible because of rook takes a1, rook takes a1, knight takes c3. And I thought black had to be at least equal here, probably better. One idea is to go rook a5 and queen a8. Attacking this b5 pawn, attacking this sort of pseudo-pinned knight a bunch of times. Kind of a cool little maneuver. Stockfish points out that queen d7 right away is just very good. It's pretty much impossible for white to defend b5. Yeah, and the only other move I thought was possible here was bishop g5, but after just h6, again, something like this I thought was probably better for black. And something like bishop h4, g5, and then just knight f5, it's impossible for white to defend d4. It's just hanging in all of these lines. And this is one reason why I like to play this line as black. I really enjoy playing against the exchange variation as black because of this 9 bishop f5 stuff against the Voronezh. I feel like these positions are just extremely easy to play. Maybe it's because I've studied them a lot, but I feel like black's plan is just very straightforward. It's always bishop g4, e6, knight e7, knight f5, gang up on d4, always look for e5, etc. And just that's really it. It's white's play on the queen side is a little bit more nebulous. It's a little bit harder to conceive. But okay, so I thought for a long time, I evaluated all those moves, and I decided to go with knight c4. Based on the fact that everything I saw after bishop takes c4, bishop g5 was just simply good for black. My opponent fairly quickly played queen c2, which I think is a mistake. And he admitted after the game that he didn't like this move at all. It just simply allows knight takes e3, f takes e3, knight f5, and already I don't think white can defend this e3 pawn. The point is that after rook a3, which is what was played in the game, bishop h6, the bishop quote-unquote peeks around the corner, and e3 hangs. And Stockfish already gives us -3, for instance, to give you a sort of a feel for how dire white's position is already, because once e3 falls, d4 falls, and once d4 falls, it's going to be hard for white to hold this queenside together. Also, this knight on a4 is just kind of awkward, and now with the rook on a3, it's actually pinned. So my opponent went rook b1. I don't know if he has anything much better. I mean, he can try other moves. What did I look at? Queen d2. I think I thought queen a5 was strong. Was it queen a5? The problem is if he takes it, I take back, and e3's hanging again, and also I'm ready to double up on this nasty pin on the a file already. And other than that, I mean, it's hard to find another move. But okay, he played rook b1, and effectively after bishop takes e3 check, the game is really already over. I think my opponent kind of threw himself on the sword here. He played rook takes e3, trying to save the d pawn. But it was probably better to just go king h1, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, bishop takes d4, and trying to fight on here. But yeah, again, I mean, black has two center pawns that are just going to start doing work, and c5 is loose. White's down 2 pawns. I can even just go bishop g7 and then install the knight on d4. So it's all pretty dire at this point. Stockfish actually thinks rook e3 is the second best move compared to king e1, so I don't know. Or king h1. Maybe it's because white doesn't have many other choices, but okay, so this is what my opponent went for, and after queen b3, I don't know. I mean, yeah, at this point, it's a little bit academic, just because white's down an exchange and a pawn for basically nothing, and still has some problems to solve. d4 is still weak. This knight is still bad. After queen b3, which of course hits this knight, I decided to just go bishop takes f3. Very simply just chopping off pieces and more pieces when I'm up material and weakening d4. I don't think white can go queen e3 just because of bishop takes e2 when a4 is still hanging. The queen on b3 still needs to protect this knight, unfortunately, so it's only like queen takes e3 is only really like a pseudo threat. So he takes back immediately, and then I went knight f5. This is a very stable and strong square for my knight. It hits d4, just kind of obvious chess. And after queen d1, the only, well, I guess rook d1 is possible, but protecting d4 and remaining, keeping this remaining protection on a4. I went queen f6. I also thought about rook a5 here, as mentioned before, eyeing b5 even though it's protected now, and looking to go queen a8 and invade along the a file. That's also very reasonable, but I think it's probably a little bit more logical to start play on the king side and against his weak pawn on d4. It's also possible, considering how the game went, to play queen g5 immediately instead, looking for queen e3 or knight h4, something like that. That might be the most accurate move, but either rook a5 or queen f6 are also quite strong. So rook b4 is practically forced, and I thought a little bit here, just because it's not necessarily all that easy to make more progress now as black. Like, I don't have any super great pawn breaks, and like these rooks, with how close the game is and how advanced white's queenside pawns are, it's not easy to find a way in. Like, I can go, one idea that I thought about is rook a5 and rook f to a8, but I don't even actually have a threat in that position. I mean, the knight on a4 is protected. Of course, it makes it hard for him to move, and it improves my pieces slightly, but I still need to find something else to do here. And I think I found a good idea. So I started with knight h4, And after bishop e2, I went queen g5, threatening mate. Lame, but I'll take it. Bishop f1, queen e3 check. And then after king h1, I went back to f5. So essentially, I've snaked my queen in from d8 to e3 and forced his bishop to a more passive square with this little maneuver, queen f6, knight h4, queen g5 check, all that. Just improved my queen slightly and forced his pieces back to worse squares. And he has little better than what he played in the game, c6, just trying to mix it up a little bit. And after I took, he went b6, again, trying to cause some trouble. And this moment in the game is kind of funny because I found a win immediately, but I missed it before. So take a second, see if you can find the win here. Okay. I played 33, queen a3, and my opponent resigned. Just very simple double attack, attacking the rook and attacking the knight at the same time. Of course, if he could protect this rook without having to remove a defender of this knight, he wouldn't be in any trouble. But the only way to protect this rook is queen d2, and that hangs the knight. And he can't move the rook to the only other square that protects the knight, and so he loses this piece. And that was the game. My opponent resigned. But it's funny. So after queen e3 check, king h1, I also have queen a3. And I played knight f5 pretty quick. And right after I played it, I just unleashed a stream of horrible obscenities at my computer because I saw queen a3. So after knight f5, c6, b takes c6, I was praying that my opponent didn't make some move that ruined queen a3. And luckily, after queen a3, or b6, it still works. So, and that was it. My opponent resigned. A tough game, a tricky one. Shout out to my opponent. Very, very nicely enjoyed a post-mortem with him afterwards. He was still in good spirits, a good sportsman, and I wish him luck in the future rounds. I got lucky in rounds 1 and 2. Really, I mean, you'll notice that in both games I got positions where I knew a lot of theory. I had a lot of background just studying those types of positions and structures, and so I knew where all of my pieces should go. I knew the typical plans. And in both games, I played a bunch of theory, and then right when my theoretical knowledge pretty much ended, my opponent started making mistakes. Like in this game, in the last game, my opponent got his queen trapped like right after I stopped making moves that I knew, and in this game, I played all of these moves pretty quickly, and then my opponent played rook a1 instead of the more accurate bishop g5, and then played knight a4, which is probably a mistake on account of knight c4, and white has some problems now, and then he played queen c2, which probably just yields him a lost position after this. And so really, like right out of the opening, there was, queen c2 and then knight a4, and I just got lucky that after this, white just simply had no defense. So really my problems in both of these games were more of like being technically accurate in much better positions and not letting him slip away. I was never in any trouble. I was always pretty much equal or winning, so that's nice. Spoiler alert, we'll see that in round 3 that was not the same type of experience. So when I get to finishing up my annotations and my analysis for that game, that'll be a little bit more interesting and a little bit more of a fight for you guys to enjoy. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm sorry for all the uhs and all the likes. I'm a little bit less prepared for this one than I was for the first one. Damn it, I just said again. Okay, so my fiance is just walking in. I got to end this recording. I hope you guys have a nice night. Bye.